Welcome to Let's Talk About It, a podcast created by students for students. There's a lot of talking going on these days, but oftentimes that talk seems empty. We're searching for real, genuine conversation. We want a space where we're able to talk about everything from the serious to the seemingly mundane and see how faith informs that conversation. Have something on your mind? We do. So let's talk about it. All right, welcome back for another episode of Let's Talk About It with our series 10 Commandments in 2020, where we have been looking at this crazy year that we've been having through the lens of the 10 Commandments. And this week we got the Fifth Commandment in 2020, and it's been a little interesting start to the podcast. And for our listener, actually, this is a historical thing of let's see how much we can rile Pastor Lee up just a little bit before we get going.
No, it's not true. Literally, you just smile.
It's got a precedence. It's got a precedence for sure. And it makes sense because we are doing the Fifth Commandment out there, listener. And when we start looking at the Fifth Commandment, we see the words, "You shall not murder," to start with. And when you guys think of Fifth Commandment, you hear that, "You shall not murder." What do you originally think, or what comes to mind?
Well, obviously it says you shouldn't murder, so you shouldn't kill other people. I mean, I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory.
No, it just feels pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah.
So it feels like we're good, right? We don't have to talk about this.
Right.
Oh, that's done. That's a quick episode.
That's the quickest episode. Thank you guys so much for joining us. This will be good. No, actually, it gets a little tougher when you start unpacking like what Luther says there. So, Aiden, if you'll read for us, what does this mean there when you see the meaning of this episode?
Well, we should fear and love God so that we do not hurt or harm our neighbor in his body, but help and support him in every physical need.
So it's interesting because I hear that and I'm like, okay, what does this mean, right?
What is physical need, though?
Oh, sure. Okay, so interesting. No, unpack that. What do you mean by that?
That's what I'm questioning. Like, what does physical mean?
So we do not hurt or harm him, our neighbor in body, but help and support him in every physical need. Okay, so what do you think that means?
Gosh, I honestly don't know. That's kind of a, I don't know. It's not like broad, but I guess it's kind of a broad term.
It's pretty broad.
I think it's hard right now because we're thinking of our neighbor. So I'm going to ask you, what are your physical needs?
Food. You got to eat.
Yeah, food, water, your main things.
Food, water,
shelter.
Safety, shelter. Yeah. Yeah, so all of a sudden that's what it is Luther's kind of turning the table on this and saying, look, if your neighbor is lacking those things, food, water, shelter, health, physical protection, you are not honoring the Fifth Commandment. Whoa. All of a sudden that makes it hard. It's easy, so to speak, not to kill somebody, right? For most, I would say hopefully most of the people you meet, that's a pretty easy thing, right? And I know it's kind of funny to have to say that, but I watch too many crime shows to assume otherwise, right? But like, here you start to take it to a whole nother level. He's connecting it to the physical needs of our neighbor. So if our neighbor is starving or thirsting or not protected or there's a physical harm coming to our neighbor and we're doing nothing about it, Luther says you got to check yourself. It says help and support him in every physical need.
So by not helping the man under the bridge, like not giving him food or something like that, that'd be breaking this commandment?
Ouch. Yeah, right?
That's what
It's tough, isn't it? Okay, now we'll get there. We'll go even further when it comes to 2020. It'll be good. Okay, if that wasn't hard enough, Jesus, when he's unpacking the Fifth Commandment, says, "You've heard it said, thou shalt not murder. I say you shall not be angry with a person in your heart." So he's expanding even more. So he's saying, actually, like Jesus is unpacking a little bit more and saying, you shouldn't even be angry in your heart. Why? Why does he say that? And I always have to unpack this for our students when we go through confirmation. When you're angry in your heart towards someone, what sort of things come to your imagination?
Murder.
Exactly. You want to hurt them. You want to kill them. You want bad things to happen to their physical person. And so that's why Jesus does this. So Jesus is the one unpacking this, saying, if you want to kill somebody in your heart, you're breaking the Fifth Commandment. I'm telling you. And so now first, let's go ahead and put this out there. Why is Jesus saying that? Why does Jesus say, be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect? Statements like that. Because the reality is,
we're not perfect.
You can't. You're not perfect. You can try to follow the law all you want to. You will not find your salvation in it. If you think I have to be a good person in order for God to love me, "Ugh, I am so sorry for you." That's not true. There is no such thing as a good person walking this planet. It was only Jesus. And as I like to tell people in student ministry, this is the first time I actually get to say this in this podcast. Jesus did not come into this world to take you from being a bad person into making you a good person. He came into this world to take you from death into life. And that is two different things entirely. So the point Jesus is making is certainly you cannot fulfill the law, but he's also saying, again, the way we talked about in the first episode of how do we use the law, one, it's showing us that we need Jesus. We're in trouble without Jesus, and that's a good thing for us to recognize. It's not a bad thing. We don't have to think negatively about ourselves. We're seeing ourselves realistically, and then we can also see the Ten Commandments as painting a picture of who we were created to be. So if we want to honor the Fifth Commandment because of the love that God has poured out and saved for us in Jesus Christ, then what can we do? All right, so let's go ahead and take that dive. Or do you have questions about before we get into 2020?
Well, I have a question. So why is hatred so bad? Why, like, it's always like, hate's such a strong word. Why would you say you hate something or you hate this person or something like that? That's such a strong word. Why do people always refer to it as such a big deal?
So I feel a question behind the question, which is, I think you're asking us, isn't it okay to hate, or shouldn't hate be more normal or something like that?
Well, because it feels more normal, like nowadays, I guess. Moving into 2020,
We're in a world of hate.
Well, and I think ultimately, I would put it like this: what's the opposite of hate?
Love.
What are you called to do?
Love.
Yeah, so I think that's what it is. And I would say, I would go all the way back to fruits of the Spirit. So, and again, listener, if you're hearing this, the way we understand God and His gifts, He's given us the gift of the Holy Spirit, and that's a reality of faith that we have inside of us. And so, the Bible is very clear to start to unpack what it looks like to be in line with the Spirit and what it looks like to be out of line with the Spirit, or to be one of God's children, or to not be acting like one of God's children. It's a common type of metaphor that the Bible uses. And so when it unpacks there, Paul does this in I'm going to mess it up, Galatians. He does this, and he says, these are the fruits of the flesh. So the negative side, right? So the fruits of the sinful flesh is what he's going for, the sinful nature. These are the fruits of the Spirit. And fruits of the Spirit are the easy ones to list: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And so you have that, and what you don't have is hatred. So he's saying when hatred comes out in your life, that's not of the Spirit, that's of the world or of the flesh. So it's from the wrong side. And it's not that it's our sinful nature, it's the reality, but it's not something we would honor or uphold or count as a great character piece. And certainly if you're someone who has a bent toward anger, let's talk about it, right? You need to be talking with somebody, whether that's a pastor, because I would consider that a spiritual issue, or there could be the psychological side where you need to talk to a professional counselor or psychiatrist with that. Does that help, Aiden, at all?
Yes.
Okay. Because did I accurately identify where the question was coming from?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we're there. Okay, what else you got?
I don't have like any other questions, but I kind of want to see what we have to say about where we can see hatred in 2020. Or
sure, yeah, because that's a good one.
Thing like that.
That's a good one. So let's go ahead and start with that, the anger conversation. And then we'll dive back onto the stuff, Clayton, that was like surprising. What do you mean my physical needs? What do you mean the guy under the bridge? We'll come back to that in 2020 after the anger conversation, and then wrap our conversation up. But the anger conversation in 2020. So where do you see anger? Where do you see hatred when you look at the year that we're living in?
What do you think?
Dude, it is so hard to like just put out something specific because the anger is just all over the place. You feel like, especially like if what we see through the media, like
sure.
I guess that's something that we see more from the media, though. You know, like it's being pushed more by the media. Is that anger towards one side or the other, or just in general towards a group of people? And
I think this is a common trend we're seeing in our conversations about 2020 at this point. I mean, it seems like there are sides, like, and I think that's part of the problem, right?
But like, you only see it though more towards the politics side, and where you see it on social media or in the news. But whenever you're there in person, you're not seeing it nearly as much. You're seeing more of that, that, I guess, coexistence as with your fellow neighbor.
Sure, no, totally. So there's this ease to be able to on social media see it as two sides, and again, it's kind of the nature of America, right? Even George Washington says a two-party system is going to destroy America, right? I am totally paraphrasing there, but he did not like the two-party system, didn't think it was a good thing, but look at what it's done. We're still seeing it as a binary world, like this side and this side, and certainly there's other pieces that factor into that: light versus dark, good versus bad, things like that. But you have social media certainly heightens it up, and it's trying to get you, and especially in election year, they're going to try and get you onto a side because it's all about money, it's all about politics, it's all about power, money and power, truly, and that's all politics is these days, right? So and that goes all the way back to the First Commandment conversation we had about where's your heart lying, what's your treasure, stuff like that.
So basically, it's Star Wars' fault that all this is happening.
Sure, yeah, Star Wars. Well, it's interesting then, right? So that's why. So you got me on superhero movies. That's why like some of these 2000s, 2010 superhero movies became a little more fascinating because it blended or blurred the lines between what is a villain, what is not a villain. I think specifically of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the whole issue in Sokovia. Right, all of a sudden the good guys destroyed a bunch of stuff. Wait, what do you mean? They were bad? I think Amazon, I don't recommend this for children, but somebody told me about it, so I watched it. But Amazon released a series called The Boys, which is about a superhero gang that is awful. Like, they're miserable, but they're the heroes. They're the good guys. So these blurring lines is kind of bringing all of this into question of these two sides, Star Wars, all this stuff, the idea of good versus bad. The best innocent one for this was actually Star Wars, and that was in Star Wars The Last Jedi. At the very end of the movie, they stole this plane and they said, oh, this is for the bad guys. And you start looking through the list of things that they were selling, and they were selling to both sides and saying there's no good, there's no bad type thing. So good movie, challenging all those pieces, but certainly that. So on our social medias, on the news, there's trying to make you angry at another side. But Clayton, you pointed out in person, those lines somewhat go away in a sense. But I would say that I've still seen some heated conversations in person.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And so what do you think, where is the anger at? What is you said, where do I start? But let's go ahead and throw some of those out where you're seeing anger on each side of a conversation.
Karens.
Okay, unpack that. We may have people listening that still don't know the reference of Karens. So what do you mean there?
Well, Karens are like the uptight moms that are like always asking for a manager at dinner so that they can complain about something. And they're like the typical soccer moms that, you know what I mean?
So, and what would a Karen be complaining about?
Literally anything. Like, it doesn't matter.
Her salad's too salty.
Her salad's too salty?
Yeah. Like something so like stupid that no one would ever complain about.
That's not worth fussing over.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And that's what a Karen does.
And I've certainly seen Karens when I don't often, but I have opened up TikTok and I've seen the Karen character brought in there about little things.
You have TikTok?
I do have one. Well, we created one night after Let's Talk About It because y'all told me to. So, but what I noticed though too is you have the other side of, particularly, I've noticed it's actually, well, it's teenagers. I was going to say it's one gender or another, but it's not. Where they try and get Karens angry. So like they'll do things that are actually really, really dumb. Like I'm almost want like another character name to come out for those kind of teenagers. Like we need a male and a female.
A Chad.
Name. Like a Chad and a Brittany. Let's go with that. Yeah. Where they're just trying to make Karens mad for no good reason and they're actually being silly, Like, yeah, make that stick, listener. Make that happen. So anyways, but yeah, because there's this level of I need to be entertained. And we talked about this a little bit in the last episode too of I'm trying to make my parents angry because that's the cool thing. I'm trying to make adults angry. And in reality, it's that when we look at the Fifth Commandment, that's not a good thing. When you look at Jesus' words, anger is not good in any of its forms because it's not good for anybody. I don't want somebody actually angry at me. I don't want someone seriously mad. And we kind of brush it off as just kidding or just joking and things like that. But it's not when it becomes real, and it becomes real too fast.
When does it become real, though?
Have you ever had that experience, Clayton?
No.
Where it's become real and people start crying over the anger and all this stuff?
I've never had people cry.
That you know of. Okay, so... so the Karens, you mentioned the Karens, but then there's also some pretty serious stuff that the anger is coming out over. So again, some of the common Topics we've talked about already. Politics, the election, certainly a lot of anger there. A lot of emotion ties back to the first commandment, of course, of where is your fear, love, and trust? It's in some person being elected to president on both sides. That's a problem, you know? And if that doesn't happen, you're angry, your world's ending, we need to bring in the comfort dogs, okay? On either side. So it's kind of interesting there. You have the protests we got into certainly at the end of the last one, and there's certainly a lot of anger that's come out, and there's a level of anger that, again, is not good, but at least in that conversation, there's a level of anger is understandable. And I think we can do that to a lot of things. Let's go to the pandemic, right? Let's go to stay at home. Have you been angry that you've had to stay at home before?
Sure.
Well, yeah. And again, there's a level of that anger is understandable, but I think the piece that comes in with this one is it can't win though. You know, anger can't end the day. So the inconveniences, especially when you look at the bigger picture, why did I get angry over little things? It's the whole, like, have you heard the phrase kick the dog?
Never.
Well,
We're not that old.
It's not my age group. It's far beyond my age group. It's like my grandparents' age group.
Oh
type thing.
gosh.
Yeah. So
why are
greatest
they
generation.
kicking dogs?
So it's, the idea behind it
rude.
is that your day was awful somewhere else. So when you come home, you let the dog have it because you're taking it out on them. So there's a level of every little inconvenience adds up so much that you end up exploding because you didn't appropriately handle your anger or frustrations with other things.
That is an awful saying.
Isn't it? No, it's terrible.
like
But it's
eating
because what it goes back to, you want
worse.
people to hurt, right?
Yeah.
You want people to hurt because of it, right? So yeah, that's the idea behind that phrase, is just that, you know, when you hurt, you want to make other people hurt. And it's not a fun saying, it's not a cool saying, but that's the idea. And I think that's what people are doing with their anger now. There's these inconveniences of the world that they're all dealing with, and it builds up inside of everybody, and you have to kind of take it out on somebody if you don't deal with it in the right way. I mean, anything else come up when you think of the topic of anger in 2020?
Well, I mean, we kind of already said the main things that are kind of happening in 2020, and honestly, the fact that we have to relate everything that we already have in 2020 to anger is kind of bad. That's all that we're kind of involving our lives in, is that.
Well, and so would you say, like, I mean, we've done a number of episodes right now, right? We've recorded some. So I mean, again, I like the first commandment, I like the fourth commandment, I like the eighth commandment. Again, the fifth commandment and anger is pretty relevant today, because I do see a lot of anger. And I think it all comes back to the first commandment. I mean, it's when that's broken down, and when you forget that one, everything else falls apart. And I think it's particularly anger, you know, and things like that. So I think you're right, though. It is a little disappointing. So here's the ultimate question. What advice do you have for this world when it comes to anger and all these things today?
Be happy.
Okay. Aiden, how do I be happy?
Don't be angry.
How do I stop being angry?
I don't know. That's a hard thing to do. You know, I think honestly, just filling your life with people that are good to be around, and putting yourself in an environment where there's not a whole lot of, you know, just generated anger between other people, and just putting yourself in situations where, you know, you'll have the best outcome for yourself and for others, is going to make you happier at the end of the day, and it's going to make it easier for that anger to not be there.
Yeah, because you definitely can't do it on your own. Like, whether it's someone you have to have, like friends or family, or it's God, you have to have someone there to walk alongside of you, and like, but you first have to notice the problem.
Exactly.
Because it won't ever, and nothing will be fixed until you know that there's a problem. And
I think that's the key, Clayton, is that those people that you're surrounding yourself with, because I don't want a listener to hear and say, well, I get angry a lot, or things like that. No, I'm not saying that. Like, certainly if you know certain circumstances that are making you angry, like for instance, I mean, people talk about detoxing from social media. Great choice, you know, especially if social media is making you angry, or you're watching the news is angry. I've seen people do that too. Good choice to turn it off. Like, you'll feel better about the world. But the reality is, you're probably going to get angry if you're a human being. So having that community and people that you know you can talk to and process about it too. And let's say, listener, someone comes to you and says, I'm angry. Don't tell them what to do. If someone's doing that, they're opening up to you. They want to talk about it. Let them talk about it. Let them vent about it. Let them be angry and say, okay, what are we going to do with this anger? That kind of that's the kind of conversation I hope. So I guess that's where I would summarize my answer is let's talk about it. What do you do with anger? Let's talk about it, right? Okay, so physical needs. That's the other part that kind of throws everything off. So Clayton, I noticed particularly you're like, whoa, 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 whoa.
The man under the bridge.
What happened? Like, what was going on in your brain? Like when you read that or heard that or said, what?
Like physically, like do not, yeah, like you have to help and support your neighbor in every physical need. But like your neighbors, everyone around you, it's the people you live with, the people you live around. It includes the people under the bridge. It includes like your neighbor down the street who's getting evicted or whatever. Like it includes everyone. That's just crazy to think about.
And it's every need. It's not just one singular need. It's every person and every need.
So how does that make you feel?
That's a lot. It's overwhelming.
Very.
Yeah.
Very overwhelming.
No. And so good. This is a good one. So I always, when I was a camp director, what I would do at the beginning of every summer at the very least, and if we needed to remind each other, because I would always say I had 2 rules at camp, and you guys have experienced me on trips now. I have 2 rules. What are my 2 rules?
Love and respect.
Exactly. Love and respect. And it's coming back to the 10 Commandments. Ultimately, we're called to love God, love our neighbor, respect God, respect our neighbor. And so I said, you know what? God actually knows what he's doing, because he doesn't say, love yourself, right? And there's love your neighbor as yourself is certainly the commandment in Leviticus 19. But there's a level of there's a level that God wants you to have worth and value and know that your worth and value is found in him alone, right? And things like that. But there's this other level of God knew what he was doing and telling you to love your neighbor. Because if every single one of us are loving our neighbor, let's say I'm surrounded by 100 people in this room, and that's the only command, love your neighbor. How many people do I have loving me in that moment?
Everyone that's in that room.
Yeah, 99 other
Yep.
people. So me as one individual doesn't have to worry about loving myself because I have 99 people loving me for me. And I feel like my back's covered. People got my back, And so that's the idea of what God's doing is if we're all truly trying to honor this commandment and protect every physical need of our neighbor, again, this is just basics, right? Food, water, shelter, protection, physical needs, then we'll be okay. All right, so here's the question for you. How does that apply to 2020?
You have to.
Is there anything going on that's harmful to people's physical?
The coronavirus.
The coronavirus. What's this? I haven't heard about it. Yeah.
No, what is it?
The Rona. All right. So I like to call it the Rona. I don't know why. But anyways.
2020.
But so that's the thing though, is there's a level of us being called to protect our neighbor's physical needs when it comes to some of these, whether or not they're enforced or not, as we got to talk about in our last episode, whether they're enforced or not, there's a level of us needing to be respectful of social distancing and preventing the possibility of us spreading whether you're masking or not, preventing the spread of giving it to someone else. So if you're someone, let's just say you're listening and you're a non-masker, which is, if you'd asked me a year ago if masker and non-masker was going to be a term, I would have said, what in the world is about to happen, right? And so, but let's say, so if you're not masking, then that means you're probably not going to be around anybody within 10 feet because you're still watching out for your neighbor's physical needs. If you want to be someone who honors this commandment and stuff like that. I mean, how else do you see this playing out in 2020, or what more to that conversation do you want to have?
Gosh, like you said, just having the awareness of like the people around you and stuff like that. That's obviously a lot of it, but even the fact that it took a pandemic for us to realize that, we need to be more caring to our neighbors and we need to be more cautious and aware of like the people around us. It's kind of sad that we couldn't realize that. It took a whole pandemic to realize that.
Sure. I mean, no doubt. I mean, and you're preaching to the preacher right now. I mean, there's a level of that, right? So but then there's the other side of all of this too, right? Of this goes beyond that. So what are some other, physical needs? Are going to be food, it's going to be water, it's going to be shelter, it's going to be protection and things like that. So there's a level of, right, when we see, again, I'll go controversial and then I'll play to the other side too. The riots, and you see the way that certain people are being restrained and knocked over and things like that in circumstances because of anger, sure, because you don't like what's going on or you have your own side or you don't feel appreciated. But there's people physically being harmed in some of these things, and that's not okay on either side of it. Whether or not you're a rioter who is hurting a police officer or a police officer who's hurting a rioter, like I'm not okay with physical harm in that situation. Like, certainly safety, I'm okay with safety, but hopefully on each side, what I would want as a Christian is for it to be done in the least harmful possible way, to ensure safety. So there's that level. And then you've got the other side of people needing to provide for their physical needs for their families. And so you talk economy, right? And that becomes a really big issue in 2020 of I need to be able to go to my job so my family can afford the basics, to be able to put a roof over my head. And I'm going basics. I'm not talking the super nice. We live in a pretty affluent area. We're very blessed in this area, but I'm talking the basics. And so there's a level of that piece that we've got to be helping our neighbor protect. And we'll probably get even more into this in our final episode with the 9th and 10th commandments, but I think it applies here too when we start to think about that.
Yeah, I definitely think that, I think when you think of physical needs, you don't necessarily think of like all that we've talked about. You don't think about the jobs and, you think about your health and stuff like that, but you don't think about the other things that go into keeping you afloat kind of thing. And I think that's definitely important to remember that there's a lot more to, being a part of this society that we live in America, and being able to continue to live here. It's hard, it's not easy. And, the fact we all need to be able to help our neighbor kind of thing. And that almost kind of goes back to our last episode where we were talking about just being there for your neighbor and helping and stuff like that.
Yeah, and this will definitely be unpacked in the 7th, the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th commandments too. Ultimately, what God is telling us, what does it mean to love your neighbor? You truly do want what is best for every person you will ever meet. Like, and you don't want to take anything from them. You don't want to beat them. You don't want to, like, again, in a competitive way. You don't want to win or whatever. You want what's best. You want their best for them as far as life goes, right? So you want it to go well for them. And things like that. And so that's the challenge, right? Because we don't live in a world that does that. We live in a world that says you have to win, you have to be on top, things like that. And so it's a matter of kind of following through with that too. So yeah, I mean, so people losing jobs, physical, the person under the bridge. I'm thankful to be in a place here where we have a food pantry, and thankfully the pandemic's actually allowed an opportunity for youth maybe to be a part of that in a way we haven't been before. So I feel like since, was it May or was it June?
It's like week 23 of spring break, yeah.
But like for the last 2 months, easy, I've been helping out with our hands-on in the food pantry with students and things like that. And I'm thankful we were able to start that up again because we were worried in the initial shutdown of everything, we weren't able to provide for needs. And now we're able to provide even beyond that. And again, we're not the only ones at all. There's so many great people doing great things out there. You don't have to be a faith-based organization to be able to honor this commandment and doing that. But again, just trying to help people. And certainly as a pastor throughout the years, I've gotten so many conversations of someone who will come up with a physical need, and it pulls at your heart. So I'm thankful for organizations that are able to kind of come alongside and help to get people where they're at, and ultimately put them back on their feet. And especially here, though, that'll come out more in the 7th, the 9th, and the 10th commandments. But here it's that physical needs. So what are the basics of health and safety and nutrition and things like that, and just in general, not wanting harm to come to their bodies in general. So I think that all applies here. So as we've been kind of wrapping up every conversation, like what conversations do you hope to have? Because again, I hope, listener, for you, and I hope for you, Clayton and Aiden, after this conversation, we start to see the world a little bit of a different way. And so hopefully more conversations can happen from this conversation. So what are some of those conversations you're hoping people are having or things you're taking away that, again, hopefully get talked about in people's circles?
Well, I think in regards to this commandment, I think you need to know that even how we started off by saying it seems pretty straightforward of what this means. Obviously, by the end, we kind of found out that it's not as straightforward as we thought, and just to realize that there's a lot that goes into that, not harming or hurting others it's more than just a physical, but it can be anywhere from, emotional or anything like that. But you also need to remember that in that you need to help and support people, and that at the end of the day is the biggest part. It's kind of the positive and the negative portion of it. You have to see the negative, which shows you, what you're doing wrong. But in the same part, you need to see the positive, which you can help to improve upon.
Exactly. And that's where we, again, for opening episode, the partnership of the 10 Commandments of the gospel is just incredible. And then go even beyond that, the partnership of the 10 Commandments with the gospel, with the work of the Holy Spirit. It's incredible, right? So we want to do good, not to earn God's love, because that's already been taken care of, but because of how God's loved us and provided for us. Clayton, how about you? What conversations are you hoping people are having as they come out of this episode?
Yeah, so pretty much the same thing as Aiden, like that the fifth commandment isn't just about you shall not murder. It's more about your neighbor's well-being as his physically and how you're going to support him in every physical need, as it says. So I think that's just one thing that needs to be brought up first thing if you ever start talking about this, and I think that's a big thing we should really see today.
Yep, exactly. And I think, so one way to apply it as we kind of part ways too, I mean, you guys are going off to college, right? Guys do stupid things in college, but like you saw it already in high school too, but fights, right? Fights aren't good. Physical harm is not good. And so there's a layer of, why do you want to jump in? Well, because this law is written on your heart. Like, you don't want that for anybody. It's not good. That's why I actually get really troubled. I've seen throughout my years, I've seen a couple of times where teenagers make violent videos viral or really want to watch people get harmed, and it troubles me to my core. I think that's where I would start to throw around a word like evil. I think that's a little evil to want to watch people get harmed physically or come close to death or be killed. I think that because written on my heart is this commandment, is this law of God on the heart of everybody, of that's not good, that's not okay. So again, I hope that you guys, I think, have really honed in on exactly what I hope for too, and that's more conversations about what it means to truly love my neighbor ultimately. And I think we're going to find that as we continue on this journey through the rest of the commandments in the second half of the law. So guys, thank you so much for joining us. Definitely send us your questions. Man, I'm so happy for you for joining us. I'm so grateful for you for joining us. And I hope that you'll continue to ride with us as we jump into the sixth commandment, kind of a spicy commandment next in our next episode here, sixth commandment in 2020. Thanks for joining us. We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Let's Talk About It. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to give us a follow. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform, the Trinity Klein app, or both Instagram and YouTube at TK Crew Students. Have a topic in mind you'd like us to use as a theme? Let us know. Let's talk about it. We'll see you next time.